If you've ever lived long enough in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you come to recognize the subtle rhythms of the mornings like a familiar song. It's not the kind of music that blares from radios or pipes through speakers. It's a soft, steady symphony of small sounds. The gentle hum of sprinklers humming to life, watering the freshly mowed lawns before the sun climbs too high. The distant tapping of a woodpecker, precise and uneven, somewhere in the old oak tree down the block. The low rumble of a delivery truck, slowing as it stops at mailbox after mailbox, each thud of the packages landing on porches, punctuating the calm. That Wednesday morning in early May carried the unmistakable scent of damp earth, freshly turned from a night's rain, mixed with the delicate sweetness of lilacs just beginning to bloom. The sky was a soft, pale blue, only just starting to brighten as the sun edged over the horizon. I was out in the garden, wearing my faded green gardening gloves, with pruning shears in one hand and a small basket for clippings beside me. I was halfway through trimming the stubborn yellow roses that stubbornly refused to bloom on schedule every year, their petals still tightly furled against the chill. Just as I was reaching down to snip a particularly stubborn branch, I heard the familiar creak of the wooden gate next door. The sound was so ordinary, so everyday, that it barely registered. Until a voice called out, "Morning, Martha." It was Joan, my neighbor for the past 15 years, the kind of woman who wore lipstick even to take out the trash, and whose outfits somehow always looked like they belonged on a movie set from the 1950s. Today, her hair was tucked neatly under a bright red scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cool morning air. She carried a basket of freshly folded laundry, balanced effortlessly on her hip. "Morning," I called back, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Smells like rain, doesn't it?" Joan stepped closer to the white picket fence that separated our yards, leaning one elbow on the weathered wood. She gave the sky a skeptical glance, as if daring the clouds to prove her wrong. "Rain," she said, shaking her head with a small smile. "I just hung out all my good towels. If it rains, I'll be furious." Her tone dropped slightly, conspiratorial now. "You know," she added, tilting her head with a sly smile, "I was just thinking about your Harold." I laughed, not sure where this was going, but amused nonetheless. Joan always had a story or half-joke to share, and after so many years, I'd learned to expect the unexpected. "Your Harold?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What about him?" She leaned in just a little more, as if about to share a juicy secret. Back in the day, every Wednesday, like clockwork, he'd drive over to Rosewood, rain or shine, no matter what. You remember that? I stopped mid-snip, blinking. Rosewood? The name hit me like a small stone tossed into still water, sending ripples through my mind. "No, I don't," I said, shaking my head with a nervous smile. "Maybe you're thinking of someone else." Joan's eyes sparkled with mischief. Oh no, it was him all right. Big brown sedan, the one he had before the Buick. I'd see him pass my house every Wednesday morning around 10. Always looked sharp, pressed shirt, polished shoes. Didn't seem like he was headed to the hardware store, if you know what I mean. She gave me a playful wink before straightening up and lifting her basket. "Anyway, see you later, Martha." As Joan turned and walked toward her back door, I stood there in the garden, pruning shears still in my hand. The cool morning breeze brushed against my arms, carrying the faint scent of lilacs and freshly turned earth. The birdsong suddenly felt sharper, the sunlight a little too bright for comfort. Rosewood. Why did that name stick in my head like a burr beneath my skin? When Harold came out of the kitchen a little after noon, the familiar scent of his aftershave filled the air. Clean, faint, a little woody. He was dressed in his usual navy cardigan, the one he always wore when the weather was cool, but not cold. I was still kneeling in the flower bed, my hands smudged with dirt and sweat. "You've been at this all morning," he said, voice warm but distracted. "Don't overdo it. Your knees'll be sore." I wiped the dirt from my gloves and looked up at him. "Joan said something funny earlier. She said you used to drive to Rosewood on Wednesdays." For a moment, his smile didn't exactly fade. It just kind of stopped moving, like a photograph suddenly frozen in place. "I don't know what she's talking about," he said quietly, reaching down to pick a stray leaf off my sweater. "People remember things wrong all the time." Without waiting for me to answer, he added, "I'll make us some tea," and went back inside, leaving me alone with the growing knot of questions in my chest. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't shake the way his voice had gone flat at the mention of Rosewood. Harold was a man who could talk for 20 minutes about a single baseball game, reliving every pitch and play with excitement. Yet at the mention of that one place, he shut down like a locked door. That evening, the smell of roast chicken filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of rosemary from the herbs I'd sprinkled on top. I set the table quietly while Harold sliced the bread, the clinking of cutlery the only sound between us. Neither of us mentioned Joan's little comment again. But when I went to bed that night, the question kept circling my mind like a restless bird. Why did he never tell me about Rosewood? And more unsettling still, what exactly was there on those Wednesdays? I didn't know it yet, but that offhand remark over the garden fence had tugged the first loose thread in a seam I was never meant to pull. And if you're listening to this now, I promise you're going to want to stay with me, because what started as a laugh between neighbors would unravel into the kind of truth you can never unhear. The days after Joan's comment passed in a strange haze. Each morning, I found myself waking earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling as the light crept through the curtains, wondering how a single sentence could twist the familiar fabric of my life. Every Wednesday. The words echoed like a persistent ticking clock in a silent room. Harold carried on as usual, his routine flawless and calm. He rose before dawn, shaving meticulously with that old razor he'd owned since before we married. He brewed coffee strong enough to burn his throat and dressed in his favorite pressed shirts and cardigans. Sometimes I caught him staring out the window for longer than necessary, a shadow crossing his face I couldn't quite place. That Tuesday afternoon, the golden sun spilled into the living room, lighting dust motes in lazy swirls. I was folding laundry when my hand brushed against a small, worn envelope that didn't belong to the day's wash. It was tucked behind a stack of Harold's old newspapers, yellowed and purling. Curious, I unfolded it to find a faded photograph of Harold, younger and smiling, beside a woman I didn't recognize. The edges of the photo were dog-eared, as if someone had held it often. My heart skipped. Who was she? Later that evening, after we'd eaten dinner in silence, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the closet door where Harold kept his old coats. He'd always been protective of that closet, saying it held things best left undisturbed. But the knot in my stomach was too tight to ignore. With trembling hands, I pulled the door open and reached beneath a heavy pile of blankets to the dented metal box I'd seen but never dared open. The lid was cold and stiff as I lifted it, the faint scent of mothballs rising up. Inside were papers, envelopes, and a handful of receipts, fragile with age. The dates jumped out at me. All Wednesdays. One of them was from a small cafe in Rosewood called the Maple Table. My mind raced, the room spinning slightly as the rain began to tap gently on the window pane. I sank to the floor, clutching the receipts like proof of a secret life. The next morning, I watched Harold from the kitchen window. He left for his errands, but instead of heading toward the hardware store, he took the road toward Rosewood. The Buick's engine hummed softly as it disappeared around the bend. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the day in my mind, the softness of the rain, the way Harold's face looked distracted, almost guarded. I realized then that if I wanted to uncover the truth, I'd have to go to Rosewood myself.
The following day, clutching the phone book tightly, I dialed the Maple Table. A woman answered, her voice warm but tired. I asked about Harold Miller and whether he used to visit on Wednesdays years ago. She hesitated briefly, then confirmed, yes, he was a regular here. My pulse quickened. I knew my next Wednesday would take me beyond my front yard to a place Harold had kept hidden for years.
The morning I drove to Rosewood, the sky was a pale slate gray, heavy with clouds that threatened rain but never quite let go. The road wound beneath towering pines that arched overhead, their branches whispering secrets in the wind. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, the leather cool beneath my fingers, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. The closer I got, the more the neat edges of suburban life faded into something rougher, older. Houses leaned a little more, paint chipped on window frames, and front gardens were wild with untamed weeds and blooms bursting in careless abandon. Rosewood wasn't a place you happened upon. It was a place you belonged to, or once had. I found the Maple Table easily enough, its faded green awning sagging slightly, the hand-painted sign offering homemade pie since 1972. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside, the warm scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon greeting me like an old friend. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I made my way to a small table by the window. The walls were covered with photographs, faded black and white portraits of smiling faces, Christmas dinners, and pie contests from years gone by. The air felt thick with stories. A woman approached, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp and quick. "Can I get you something?" she asked, voice low but kind. "I'm looking for someone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Harold Miller? Did he ever come here?" Her expression softened, but there was a flicker of something else. Maybe recognition, maybe caution. Harold. Yes, I remember him. Came in every Wednesday morning like clockwork, always sat in the corner by the window. He glanced toward a faded photograph pinned near the counter. I followed her gaze and saw a picture of Harold, younger, smiling with his arm around a dark-haired woman. Between them stood a boy, maybe 8 or 9, his eyes bright and curious. They looked like a family. "Who's she?" I asked quietly. "That's Evelyn. Worked at the library. Harold's companion back then. They were close. And that boy? Their son." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The woman's eyes held a gentle sadness. Evelyn passed away years ago. Harold kept it all private, didn't want to trouble anyone. The boy left town long ago. I sat there, my coffee cooling, the weight of everything settling like a stone in my chest. This was the truth Joan had hinted at, the part of Harold's life I'd never known. The bell jingled again as I left the cafe, stepping out into the gray afternoon. The air was heavy, the scent of pine mingling with damp earth. I felt as if I'd crossed a line, entering a story that wasn't fully mine. That night, back home, I stared at the photograph of Harold and the woman, the boy smiling between them. The house felt different, quieter, filled with things unsaid. If you're following along, hold tight. In the next part, the truth will come out in ways I wasn't ready for.
The day I decided to meet Joan at the Maple Table again started quietly, almost deceptively so. The sun barely peeked through the clouds, casting a pale, washed-out light over the sleepy streets of Rosewood. I arrived early, sitting at the same corner table where Harold had once spent countless Wednesdays, nursing his coffee and sharing smiles with Evelyn and their boy. Joan showed up just after 9,
wearing a soft blue cardigan that matched the calm in her eyes. But there was tension in her shoulders I couldn't miss. She slid into the seat opposite me without a word at first, then sighed deeply. "Martha," she began, her voice slow and steady, "there's more you need to know. About Harold, about Evelyn, and about that boy." She looked away, gathering courage. "You've seen the photo, but I don't think you understand what it means." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Joan took a breath and continued. "Evelyn wasn't just Harold's friend. They were in love. It was complicated. She had a husband who'd left her, and Harold was always torn between loyalty to his family and his feelings for her. The boy, he was Harold's son." My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. The room seemed to close in, the background chatter fading into a dull roar. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask 1,000 questions all at once, but all that came out was a whisper. Why didn't he tell me? Joan's eyes were sad. Because she died. Suddenly. It broke him. He buried that part of his life deep and never spoke of it. You were the life he built after tragedy. But the boy, he disappeared, and Harold never told you. It was his way of protecting you, maybe himself too. I stared out the window, watching the rain begin to fall in thin sheets, blurring the edges of the world. I realized then that the man I thought I knew had carried a whole secret life alongside the one I shared with him. Joan's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee mug. She said, "I know it's a lot to take in, but there's more." I leaned forward, the wooden table cool beneath my palms. "Tell me everything." She nodded, her gaze steady. Evelyn was a bright woman, worked at the Rosewood Library, organizing community events, helping kids with reading. Harold met her when she was going through a difficult divorce. They connected over late-night talks and shared secrets. People noticed, but Harold never admitted it. "What about the boy?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Joan swallowed. "His name was Danny. Harold was a good father, at least for a while. But Evelyn's illness changed everything." My breath caught. "Illness?" Joan gave a sad smile. "Cancer. She fought it for years, but it took her before Danny was a teenager. Harold never told anyone how hard it was, watching her fade away." I closed my eyes, picturing Evelyn's face in the photo. So young, so full of life. "What happened to Danny?" I asked. Joan's voice cracked. "He left Rosewood after Evelyn died. No one knew where he went for a long time. Harold tried to keep in touch, but eventually stopped. It broke his heart." The cafe grew quieter as the morning wore on. Joan's story filled the space between us, thick with sorrow and regret. I felt tears sting my eyes, but blinked them away. Why didn't he tell me any of this? Joan shrugged. "Some wounds are too deep. He thought he was protecting you, Martha. Maybe from pain, maybe from the truth." I stared down at my coffee, now cold and forgotten. And me? Was I just a replacement? Joan reached across the table, squeezing my hand gently. "No one replaces love, Martha. You were his life after the storm. But he never thought you deserved the storm itself." After a long pause, Joan leaned back, her eyes distant. She said, "There's something else you should know. Harold wasn't just hiding his past from you. He was running from it." I frowned, curiosity and dread knotting inside me. "Running? How?" Joan sighed. "Rosewood was where he kept his pain. After Evelyn died, he started drinking. He missed work, pushed people away. It was a dark time no one saw because he put on a brave face here, with you." I swallowed hard. Imagining the man I loved drowning in silence and sorrow I never suspected. Did you ever try to help him? Many times, Joan said softly. But he refused. Said he needed to carry it alone. I think that's why he never told you. The cafe door jingled, and a young man walked in. Joan glanced at him and smiled faintly. That's Danny, your stepson. My heart jumped. The boy from the photo, grown now, with familiar eyes and hesitant steps. Will you meet him? Joan asked. I hesitated, torn between fear and hope. I don't know if I'm ready. Joan nodded understandably. You don't have to be. But someday, maybe you'll want to. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions I hadn't expected. I kept thinking about Danny, the boy I'd never met but somehow already felt connected to through Joan's stories and that old photograph. My mind replayed Joan's words again and again. Harold's love, the secret sorrow, the years of silence. One evening, Harold came home early, his face worn and tired in a way that made my heart ache. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the overhead light casting long shadows. I decided I couldn't hold back any longer. Harold, I began, my voice shaking but steady. I know about Evelyn, about Danny. He looked up, eyes dark with a mixture of guilt and relief. I never wanted you to find out like this. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, tears welling. He sighed deeply. I was scared of losing you, scared of dragging you into pain that wasn't yours. I thought I was protecting us. I reached out, taking his hand. Secrets only build walls, Harold. We're stronger when we face the truth. He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. I'm sorry. That night, we talked for hours about love, loss, regret, and the family we thought we knew. The past was no longer a shadow lurking in silence. It was a part of us we could finally acknowledge. I realized then that healing wouldn't be easy, but it had to start somewhere, and maybe, just maybe, that somewhere was the truth.
The days that followed my confrontation with Harold were filled with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The truth was out in the open, yet the path forward felt unclear and winding, like walking through a dense forest without a map. I found myself standing at a crossroads between what was comfortable and what was necessary, between the past that had been hidden and the future that now demanded honesty. Harold and I settled into a fragile routine of openness. He began sharing memories long buried, the moments with Evelyn in quiet Rosewood cafes, the laughter of their son Danny echoing through the halls, the ache of loss that had shaped him in ways I'd never understood. Our evenings, once filled with polite silences, now carried conversations that were raw and vulnerable. Yet, amid the revelations, a question haunted me relentlessly. What did I want to do about Danny? The boy, now a man, was a living thread to a chapter of Harold's life I had never touched. Was I ready to meet him, to reach across the years of silence and build something new? One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch swing, the sun warm against my skin, but the air heavy with doubt. Harold joined me quietly, his presence a steady comfort. "Have you thought about calling him?" he asked softly. I hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready to face that part of the past, or if he want to see me at all. Harold nodded, understanding. I can't promise it will be easy, but it's a step we have to take. That night, I began drafting a letter to Danny. My pen hovered uncertainly above the paper as I searched for words that could bridge decades of silence without shattering fragile hopes. I told him about Harold, about Evelyn, about the mother he never met, and about the family waiting with open arms. Days turned into weeks. I sent the letter with a trembling hand, unsure if I would ever hear back. The waiting was a test of patience and faith.
When the reply came, it was brief but heartfelt. Danny wrote that he was willing to meet, to talk, to try. A door I had thought permanently closed had been nudged open. The day I met Danny was surreal. He looked nothing like the boy in the photograph. Taller, more guarded, yet with the same eyes that held a flicker of the past. We sat in a small cafe, sharing stories and silence, laughter and tears. The pieces of a family broken by time began to fit together again, fragile but hopeful. In the months that followed, I realized that forgiveness was not a destination, but a journey. Harold, Danny, and I were walking it together, step by tentative step. The secrets that had once threatened to pull us apart became the threads weaving us closer. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth, no matter how painful, has a way of setting us free. And sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please subscribe and share, because every family has its secrets, and every secret deserves to be heard.